Welcome back to another episode of Real Talk. I'm smiling today because I have someone who I've known for a long time. We've gone through a lot of battles and wars against trying to fight the good fight to help the city and the community. And I'm so proud of this wonderful, wonderful person and all the things she's overcome, all the things she's doing now. Hopefully we can dig into some of those things all the stuff she's done. And I just love her and her family. I love her husband, who's a good man too. And she's just a blessing for the city and all the things we've done. So I just can't wait to get in this conversation. Before I do, I want to say thank you to Park Bank. Thank you for supporting us and sponsoring us. Make sure you go to our YouTube page and our podcast to subscribe. Now let's get to my sister here. Her name is Annette Miller. How are you, sister?
I am well. It's so good to see you, especially in the midst of COVID. Just to have the opportunity to lay eyes on you and just to have this conversation I'm excited about it. I even, put my face on. So that's how excited I was. For sure, brother from another mother, for sure. And we have been through a lot together. And, I feel like we have helped each other over the decades. I'm going to say it's not even years, it's decades. And it's been a blessing to be able to get to know somebody over time and just really come to understand them. So I appreciate and the good fortune of being in your complicated but very exciting life of Henry Sanders Jr.
It's funny you call me Junior. So people don't even know me by Junior. My dad loves you right now, and that he heard that. Yes,
right,
Junior.
Right. No, you know who's really gonna love it too is your mama.
Oh my gosh. Oh my! I could see her text me right now. Oh, yes, right. You are a junior. Right. Don't you remember you were a junior? Oh my God! Oh, good Lord! Oh, good Lord! So you're right. We go way back, and what I love what you just said is you learn about people over time, right? And the consistency, and you can tell people's character and who's real and who's not. And I've actually, older I get, the more I appreciate longevity, and I appreciate the people who've done stuff for a long time at a high level. I really respect people more who've done that, right? Like, you have people come and go, but the people who've done the work over a period of time and have a body of work to show of serving people, that takes so much tenacity and endurance and perseverance. And out of everyone I could think of, Madison, if I had to pick a Hall of Fame group in my time, no, seriously, you would be on my Mount Rushmore of people who've actually put that work in over time, who've dug in, have gone through being attacked by our own community, right? Then being attacked by the progressive community, right? So so much we can get into,
right?
And in our this series this year for Real Talk, we talk a little bit about superheroes, but we're talking about the origins of superheroes. Like, where do their powers come from? How do they get there? Because, some people just think Annette Miller just showed up to be Annette Miller one day. Well, that's not true. What was the origin of her story? How did she get here? What made her? So let's talk about you as baby Annette. Where did you grow up?
Sure. So my origin story is, I got to start with my parents. My dad is African-American, born and raised in the South, Kentucky to be specific, long history over there and real deep, good stuff. And my dad served in the military in the Army, and he was stationed in Germany, and he met my mother. And my mother is German, and she came to the United States with my dad through the military. And, the first 9 years of our life was that of a, military life, moving around. I was born in Germany. My sister was born in Panama.
Hold up. You were born in Germany?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I didn't know that.
Yes. That's my roots. That's where I started. So I have a very strong affinity, ironically, and interestingly enough, when you think about intersectionality of race, African American and German, and thinking about World War II and all of that, it makes for one's identity to be complex. It's already hard to be mixed because you are wondering, who am I? But when you have these hard racial truths around identity, that of the history of German, the war, and Hitler and German. And then you have, African American, how we came over to the United States, and the history of my dad's own family and what they have done, in the South. To try and braid that together, it wasn't really braided very well. And that is a truth too, because when I hear my mom speaking about her reception to my dad's family, it wasn't one of welcoming at all, for lots of different reasons. So that's sort of the origin story in terms of like, what are my roots? I very much, I'll be honest. I mean, I felt at a very early age, I needed to identify as Black. The white community had me identified as Black and made that very clear. And then I think in terms of belonging, I knew that if I wanted to belong, the Black community was where I was going to be embraced, and other communities of color. Quite frankly, the Latino community has always been very warm and welcoming to me. And actually, even the Hmong community and the Asian community has been welcoming to me. In fact, I have a half brother who's Korean.
Hold up.
I have, yeah.
Wait a minute. So you and I go back. I thought so. You're from Germany, which I never knew. Yeah. And you have a half brother who's, did you say Korean?
Yep, he's half Korean, half Black. So my affinity for culture and for race comes from a very real place, because my own family is that diverse, and so I'm accepting, and part of my accepting is because I wanted to belong, but I think also because I was accepted by these different racial groups all along.
And then how did, because you being interracial, how did your mom deal with you saying, you know what, like, I want to identify being Black, like that's my identity? Yeah. I mean, that had to be like, as someone has a white wife, like I understand this is what you're going through, right? Yeah. So that, and then how did the white community perceive you back in the, growing up? I don't want to say what years it was back when you were growing up.
Right.
Like because there was different times then when we grew up versus now. Yeah. Right. And so how did your mom deal with that? And then how did the white kids, you talked about how every other community dealt with you, but you didn't really say how the white community embraced you, or didn't embrace you. Right.
Well, I think in terms of my mom and her identity, my mom didn't see herself as white. She saw herself as German, she's a citizen of the United States. And it was a very painful German experience for her. Anyone who's immigrated to the United States can relate to her story because of what the U.S. makes you do. You have to denounce where you're from, and you have to embrace the United States. And the way in which they did it then was very harsh. One of the things that I can really appreciate for different cultural groups outside of African American is that other groups have have fought to keep their identity. I really see that in Asian communities, and I see that in Native Indigenous community. I see that in the Latino community, this real strong grip that they have on their cultural identity. And it's because they have something to hold on to and they're fighting for it. Unlike the African and African American history, historically, it was stripped from us, and we were purposefully, trained through corporal punishment like ways to let all of that go. So what we know is U.S. culture of how whites want Blacks and, to be. So that's hard. So in terms of, to go back to my mom though, it was hard for her to watch me identify in that way. And I think she also understood it. So it was a very painful journey for her. And it was a very painful journey for me. I can say the good news is that we've reconciled that. And I'll tell you that what helped me reconcile it, even though I know that there's controversy around it because it's come back up. But honestly, Tiger Woods helped me embrace my identity, because he was the first person who publicly and visibly and with consequences get pushback on wanting to claim both. As a mixed person, I understand what he was saying and what he was trying to do. He was saying, I don't want to choose because they are both my parents, my family. Why do I have to say I'm one or the other? Now, he also is quite a bit younger, and generationally, I think identity is looked at differently. I'm a Gen Xer. And so, a person's journey around identity is just different. And I would just say that growing up, my generation, you had to choose, you had to choose where you're from. So I chose Black. And to pain for my mom and for pain for myself. My parents did divorce, and actually that's how we got to the Midwest. So we were living in North Carolina, and then we moved to Minnesota, actually. And what got me to Wisconsin was college. I was 9 when we moved. Mm-hmm. But those are the most important formative years, and a lot happened in that short amount of time. I can tell you that for sure. And I learned a lot too. So I think, to go to your question about how did the white community embrace me, I only know that through the places and spaces that I would go with my mom. So what I know, being a young person in the white community, is that there was this level of tolerance. And I actually was more upset with how the white community treated my mom, because here she is, this woman, presents as a white woman, right? And then she has her 2 kids who are not white. So as she's bringing us to church, we were raised Catholic. So she's bringing us to church, the way in which, when you would there's a part in the service where you turn to your neighbors, and just sometimes how people would act like they couldn't see us, like you have to turn towards us, but somehow they were able to not turn towards us. So I always thought that was quite interesting. And then just, I also knew whiteness through my mom's friends. And my mom was a nurse, and a very good one. She was an RN. And so I got to know the community that way, and, with a lot of mixed results, with most being kind. I mean, it was white women that I was around, and, most of them being kind. You were young, so it's easy to be kind to young people. I don't think they understood exactly what was happening. And, obviously I can't say how my mom had those conversations with her friends, about us, but, my understanding of whiteness and Black and other cultures was really through the eyes of myself in terms of what I would experience. And I picked all of it up. I picked up how white people felt about, communities of color. I picked up, how the Black community felt about the white community and other groups. I mean, I feel like I carry all of that with me. And I have to be very conscious about what I do and what I say, because I know that there's a lot that I'm holding. But because I am mixed, I tend to be one who, for me, the calling was fairness. For me, the calling was building bridges between and amongst and through different groups and different relationships. For me, it was a calling of how do you belong? For me, it was a calling of how do you, deconstruct othering. For me, it was how do you how do you rebalance humanity and look beyond race as the way in which you do it. And so all of my work, whether I was working for somebody else and now for myself on behalf of the community, quite frankly, I feel like I work for the community. I always kind of have. I've always been working for the people because I've cared so passionately about the people. And so I like to work in policy and I like to work in community. And I try to think about what are the ways in which we can bridge those ideas and those constructs.
So you moved back, you moved here at 9. What high school did you go to?
I went to Washburn High School, which here's something really fun for you.
Washburn in Minnesota, right?
Washburn in Minnesota, they were called the Washburn Millers.
And that was pretty black, though. Wasn't Washburn black, a black community?
It was a very, well, Minneapolis is very diverse.
Yeah.
So I had a very diverse set of friends. I had Native, Latino, African-American, mixed race. I knew a lot, Black, white. I knew a lot of different people, and that school held all of that. Though we tended to sort of hang closer with, the people we spend the most time with, which for me was primarily African-American, were the girlfriends and guy friends that I hung with through graduation, and still have some relationships even today. But it was a middle class high school with some high end, because it was at the time it was in a high end neighborhood, but it straddled high end and low middle income on the other side. So it was very interesting.
And where'd you go to college?
Well, I started out at a private Lutheran college called Gustavus Adolphus, and then I transferred to UW-Madison, and then that's where I finished up. Mm-hmm.
Oh, so that's how you got to Madison, to the UW.
That's how I got to Madison. Mm-hmm.
Interesting. And so you go to college, you graduate from UW, which I wish we could dig in more to what happened with UW experience, but I don't want to get into that. So you go to UW-Madison, you graduate. What's your first job out of college?
So that story is that when I was in high school, I was part of a college-bound program called Inroads, and they really set up the framework for how you should be thinking about work, right? Like how do you get, as a person of color, what should you be thinking about in terms of, access to opportunity? And so their model was about internships. So when I transferred to UW-Madison, I was no longer eligible for the program, but what I learned is that internships are key. So I really looked for an internship program, and that's where I met one of my early mentors, Frank Humphrey, and Pablo. Oh, I can't think of his last name right now, but those two introduced me to the State Summer Affirmative Action Intern Program, SAAIP. And that is how I got my first job, because I was interning with the state during college. And my first job was with the Department of Veterans Affairs, where I met another mentor, Robert Cockcroft. So I was really, and then with that, I got into WAPSI, because now I'm working for state government, and there was this group called the Wisconsin Association of Black State Employees. And so then I got introduced to a host of men and women who were African-American, working for the state, being activists, for the people, rooted in, state government, but also really wanting to do right by their respective communities, because this is statewide. So I met a lot of people and still have a lot of good relationships that started early on, 1992, on forward. A lot of the relationships that I have and that I know are from the, starting with the state government and just really getting introduced to a lot of great people throughout the Madison and some of the Milwaukee area and statewide through that.
What's interesting listening to you is listen to your story. Mm-hmm. It's so like our experience, like some of our experience make who we are. And so listening to you, how you grew up, dad from Kentucky, mom from Germany, all this stuff, like you growing up, moving around at a young age, parents divorced, going to a high school that's really diverse, then going through like a private school, and then going to UW-Madison. It makes so much sense, because if people don't know Annette, so Annette kind of works well in all worlds. And so she connects dots. Like she's like a mediator, like she's like an ambassador, like someone who can connect dots to all these different people. So that actually explains a lot to me how you got where you are. And professionally, it's interesting because you said a couple of things. Inroad gave you a vision, like they gave you an on ramp to. They gave you how to engage with the broader community. But what you said was really important is mentors. You found mentors. Like Frank Humphrey's like a legend, right? Like so, you found mentors along the way. Did you find women mentors to that journey?
So not as easily, though. They were there. I think that it was very easy to see how, just to be quite frank, Black men were really raised up, I think, in terms of leadership roles. I could see by observing that there was a huge respect for the Black women, but they weren't recognized in this from a power perspective. They weren't recognized in the same way, but you knew from a respect perspective that they were very powerful. Because I'll tell you this, when I was listening, because I did a lot of listening, a lot of the things that would happen, the men knew, like, this ain't going to happen unless we make sure that these important women were a part of it. And I do think that is still present, though I do think that needs to be deconstructed because that's
a deep conversation.
I know. Henry, you know me and my little pulpit about men and women, and in particular Black men and Black women, and the definition of leadership and who's a leader and who's not. But I won't forsake. This is your show today. So.
But it is a conversation at some point that Black men and Black women need to have.
Yes.
So we can at least have understanding of. Because I think it's unfair for both sides to try to equate what white women and white men our experiences. We cannot equate that experience from the Black experience. It's just the wrong way to do it. And what you said, I don't know any Black man doesn't respect Black women. I mean, Black women have held it down and helped Black folks thrive. Like I haven't. But it's a good conversation we should have. So was Kirby around then?
Oh yeah, Kirby was around. She was working when I knew her. She was working for the city. Gail Johnson, Kirby Mack, Malele, Chikasa Anana, Susan Canty. There was a lot of Milwaukee women that, I'd have to go in my Rolodex to say their names, but they're visually, I can see them. There was a powerhouse of women and men, young and old, really trying to hold it down in terms of making it better, I think, for African Americans, not only in state government, but like I said, in the community as a whole. Very altruistic, very much about making change, making social change, policy change, financial change for communities. But how it was done then and how it's being done now looks different for sure.
Yeah. And, I brought up Kirby because I used to work at Affirmative Action. And I've had mostly women bosses in my life, which is really interesting. Mm-hmm. But Kirby was a boss. There's Anthony Brown, there's Lamar Billups. I know Lamar brought us together. There's so many. John Odom. There's so many strong. Steve Brungan. All these people, right?
Yep.
But Kirby was. I've seen Kirby have all those Black men in the room.
Oh yeah.
And set them all straight. So.
Mm-hmm. You're right.
At that time, so to me, Kirby was the Don. Like Kirby was like the boss of all the bosses at that point. So it's interesting to hear you say that. I kind of see you in that. I kind of see you like in that lane. So who, of everything you've gone through, you worked for the mayor's office, right? For Mr.
Yep.
Was it Cheslevich? Yes, Cheslevich.
Mayor Dave Cheslevich. I practiced his name many times.
I couldn't say his name at first for so long.
No, I know.
And so you worked there with the mayor for a while. Like, how long did you work in the mayor's office?
Well, as I like to say, I worked there for 2 years human time, but probably more like 5 years dog years.
It was only 2 years?
It was only 2 years, but you would have thought I had worked there for much longer. And it was because Mayor Dave was super ambitious, wanted to do a lot. And quite frankly, his team had a lot of ideas, including myself. And we were all like, this is our moment. This is our time. Let's try to make some stuff happen. So a lot was going on. It was very busy. And Mike and I had 2 more kids. And so now we have 3 kids. And so that started to really take a toll in terms of my capacity. I had said yes to being a mom and a wife, and, the intersectionality of work and life really started to take its toll. And so actually after 2 years, I just couldn't reconcile that high intensity of work, though I loved it. Oh, I loved it so much, and was doing a lot. I mean, that's where we met. And man, I mean, talk about young folks in their 30s, wanting to make a difference. There was a lot going on, and the people that were mentoring us were really encouraging us to come out the gates and do things. And so I was starting to have a lot of tension between, what I wanted to do and what I really had the capacity to do, which is what then created the change to go into the private sector. Had an opportunity to go into the private sector and worked for MG&E. And that's where I completed, my work career for other people and started the business. But it was in that time frame where you and I met, you were doing your thing, wanting to, really bring young leaders together. So, you started Magnet, and then I was like, well, look, I'm all for, leadership and everything, but it feels very white. And we talked about that. I'm just going to call it out. And
I tell that story all the time to people. Yeah. I tell that story, I tell the story all the time about, you have to be careful the steps you do when you try to make conclusion and bring people together. Mm-hmm. There's so many different nuances. And I give that story how Magnet, and I had the event with Magnet, and I had all these, it's like 100, this is a true story. It's like about 120 people there, and it was 60% white and about 40% people of color. Now, that never happens in Madison, ever, right? And so after we had that event, the next day, I got so many white people absolutely loved it, yep. Absolutely loved it. People of color hated it, hated it, hate. Like,
it was like a high school dance, because you had everybody I'm sure it was an experience, but I think as we have come to find, it wasn't a comfortable one, and nobody did anything wrong. But again, a lot of the activities were really centered around what works, for young white professionals, and not enough about what can work for professionals of color. And at that time, nobody was ready for that. Let's be honest.
So true.
Our society has been built on how can you be a good white person? It's always been about assimilation. And it's driven by, you get benefits if you assimilate, and if you assimilate to whiteness. And Madison is, the last bastion of what that really means. I mean, for real, the Midwest always gets everything last. And so I know for all those progressive people listening right now, I'm not trying to hurt your feelings, but sorry, not sorry. That's just real talk. The reality is we've all been complicit. And I think that what you're seeing across the United States and around the world is people are tired of being complicit of a white-centered agenda. It needs to be an agenda where it is multicultural, and it looks at all points of views and all perspectives, and that it's restructured in a way that we create balance. Nothing's going to ever be perfect. Nothing's going to be designed perfectly, because we're perfectly imperfect. We're humans. We are by design imperfect, but you can take the swings out of what we currently have. In our racial constructs, if we can start centering what it means to be people and what it means to, think about how we work together, where there is opportunity to build up and lift up and really appreciate what other communities and cultures bring and start restructuring systems to accommodate that, we all win. It's, but it's, people are uncomfortable with that because something new requires change. Something new requires figuring out how you can adjust, to that new normal. And if you've been winning, on the particular game that you've been playing, you don't necessarily want to change because everything's been going just fine. So, those are the struggles we're going to struggle with. And I think you see people like you and me creating pathways for how we can have those conversations differently, I think.
Yeah, I say this all the time to people when we talk about privilege, and that's deep. That's deep, and it's it's complicated. But I always tell people okay, but are you gonna give up your privilege? Like, right. How do you get people to give up your privilege? And if you feel like people are gonna give up their privilege out of a fight, you're confusing yourselves, right? So how do you do that? But so you were at the mayor's office, you went to MJNE, and then you took a huge. So tell me if I'm wrong here. So check me if I'm wrong. I want you to check me if I'm wrong, okay? But your personality is, check, make sure, double check, then triple check, then quadruple check, then make sure it's safe. And, if I'm going to jump, I want the parachute to open before I jump out. I want to know that I want to know where the soft landing is. I need to see the map. I need to see the 20 people went before me. I need to know all of that.
Right.
And I remember us having this conversation about should you do it, should you do it? And I was always saying, go, you better do this, right? Right. So then you become an entrepreneur, become a business person. Mm-hmm. Tell us about your business, but more importantly, what was that jump? How did you make that jump? For a lot of people who are, because for me, entrepreneurship and doing that means freedom. Like you mentioned earlier, I don't pretend when I'm around white people. I don't change when I'm around black folk. I'm free, so I don't worry about if I'm around white people. I'm me. If I'm around black folks, I'm me. My Latino folks, I'm me. Asian, I'm me. But I recognize that's a privilege that I have now. So how did you make that jump to get free where you are now? You free now. You free. I'm free.
Right? Well, as free as the system can allow you to be, right? Let's be honest. I'm free within the system, but I have. Stacked up some credits and things, but I'll be honest that, I did not, it was a leap of faith. I jumped in and closed my eyes, plugged my nose and just jumped right into that very frigid, cold water. I think that what I had decided is I really wanted to know, what did I want to do? I had been for so long doing what I thought other people wanted me to do, what I thought was expected of me, what I thought was the right thing to do. And finally, and I was going to school at the time, I said, but what do you want to do? And I think part of that journey was losing Lamar Billups, because he was such a guiding light for me. He was so great. He loved to shop talk about what was happening in the community. And I would say Lamar Billups and Robert Cocroft were my underpinnings when it came to how do you give back to the community? How are you strategic? If the front door ain't open, how do you get through the side door, through the back door? I mean, they were always willing to share their perspectives and views with me and encouraged me and allowed me to sort of work things out by talking to them. And there were many others too, but they were emotionally, I was very connected to them and for different reasons. Robert Cocroft was like my dad. I mean, he gave me away in my wedding. And then Lamar Billups was like my professional dad, right? He just, if I ever had a problem, and especially when I was in the mayor's office, I could call him up, Ma, guess what just happened? And so we would talk about strategy. And so that was really important. But when Lamar died and passed away, because of health, I felt lost and unsure. I had this anchor who was very good at giving me great guidance. And I realized that I had to grow up and put on my big girl pants and start owning my own shit. And I realized that I needed to start making decisions about what I wanted. It doesn't matter what the community wants or what my kids want, or, like, what do I want? And not that those values and opinions aren't important, but what did I want? And so I said, I had wanted from a very young age, I had wanted to be my own businesswoman, and I just said, well, now's the time to do it. And so that's why I jumped in with cold feet. And I will say that, my success is by design. As you said, I'm a very planful person. And even though I'm very stiff. I know, it's so funny because you always mock me for that, but there's truth in it. And here's the truth is that, it's
all love. It's all love.
I know for sure. Part of it's personality. And I think part of it is cultural. I grew up with a woman who raised us, a single woman, ended up being a single parent raising us. I don't think people understand that when you're a woman raising kids, how vulnerable you are from a safety and security perspective, right? I don't think people understand, as being a person of color, the issues around safety and security. You have to do things smart with your brain, right? You've got to be smart about it. And then my personality is one of wanting to make I'm always the right decision, right? But what I did do is I let that go. I stopped worrying about the right decision, and I stopped worrying about being safe and secure. But I also did this when I was 48, and not 28. I did this in a community that I have now been in for 30 years. I did this in a community where people know what I'm about. They know what I care about. They know what I talk about. So I went into a business that I'd actually been prepping myself for 20 years, right?
Yeah.
So I think when I took a leap of faith, the community took the leap of faith with me because they were so proud. They were so joyous. They were so supportive. And that's all the community, white community, Black community, Latino community, Hmong community, everybody was excited for Annette and wanted to see how they could help. Because I think that's what's different now is that I think people see that change is needed. And I think they see that I'm intentional in wanting to be a part of it. I'm not the only place and space for it because it takes a collective, it takes a village to make this happen. And I want to be a part of that village. And I think people have seen that. And so I've had this beautiful, support from the community. So when I took that leap of faith, I didn't do it by myself. So, and I feel very gracious for that. Even you, the people that I talked to, as I said, I think I want to do this. And I did. I was like, I think I want to do this. And you're like, what? I can't hear you. What do you want to start your own business? Is that what you're saying? And I was like, yes, I want to start my own business. But here's a little something that might be interesting for people to know that I found striking for me. When I was signing the paperwork to leave MG&E, my hand was shaking like this. I had the pen in my hand and it's shaking as I'm signing that, yes, I am leaving MG&E and I'm about to go do something on my own. I have never felt that experience except when the first time I was trying to learn how to swim. Like, you're so scared, you're pitting out, you're shaking all over. Like, to be 48 and have that feeling is like, it was crazy. So very scary, even though there were lots of ways in which maybe it wasn't so scary because I was doing it in a community I know.
But courage is when you can take your fears and go overcome it, right?
Yep.
And so a lot of times we limit the capacity of what we can do and accomplish, right? And so we let our fears control us.
That's real.
And on a lot of different levels. And what I'm proud of you is that I'm hearing your life journey, and it sounds like you've dealt with fear all along, overcame that. Now you're doing this wonderful business and helping people, which is, you have an interesting journey, and your strength and perseverance like flows through all of it. It's interesting. And you said Lamar makes me want to cry. So shout out to Lamar. He was a mentor to me too. And I love that man. So before we go, a couple of things I want to do.
Yeah.
I'm going to give you 5 different things. And I want you first thing to come to your mind. Okay. So I'm listening. I've never done this before, but I'm listening to you. I'm like, let me break her out of her bike. I see she's not prepared for it. That's why I'm doing it, because she's not prepared for it.
All right.
All right. You ready?
I'm ready.
Mike.
Love of my life. So amazing. He made me have faith again in relationships and relationships between men and women. And he is a beautiful, beautiful parent. He is the one who raised our kids. He raised our kids. He's such a great coach. He's such a great mentor. It's so interesting. People look at me and think I'm like, that I'm like a superhero because I'm like doing all this stuff. But honestly, we do it together. And I've, to have a balanced relationship where you're doing it together is pretty special. So that's Mike. He's my rock. He's our rock. He has such a beautiful smile. That's what makes it all worth it. So I'm excited because we're going to be empty nesters soon. So we'll see what journey we take next.
Can't even imagine that. Okay. Shout out to Mike. What's up, Mike Miller? I see you. Madison.
Madison. Madison is a prototype of what can be. And that's why I have stuck it out here because, Madison is possibility. Madison can be many things if we all pull together and really think about what we're willing to do for the goodness of us all. We all love this. Everybody who is here over and over again, they love the natural state of Madison, like it's natural what it has to offer. The things you can do here in terms of activities is special. The opportunities here are phenomenal. But when it comes to talking about feeling included and thinking about what it means to belong, and when you think about it from a racial construct, we've got a lot of work to do. And I think that it can be done, but we've got to be willing to break out of our boxes in terms of how it's done. And I've seen some really good steps from a lot of interesting people who are trying to do that. And I think the last thing I'll say about Madison is that there's more than 2 Madisons. And we need to deconstruct that idea that there's 2 Madisons. There are multiple Madisons, and that it is not just the white community who has to think about what it needs to do to make change. All of those other communities and other parts of Madison need to change as well, because remember, we've been socialized and normalized to center whiteness. So how are we going to decenter it? And how are we going to recenter ourselves? And it has to look different. So we all have to change. And so we need to be open to that critique as well. And I think that there is power in the collective we. As someone has been saying all along, if one fails, we all fail.
Legacy.
Legacy is about living in the moment and thinking about what it is you want for the collective. In my opinion, I just have been raised. My mom was a nurse. My mentors were always about the community, so I have that kind of embedded in me as well. And so, legacy is about what do you leave for tomorrow. And so, I'm about modeling and disrupting and building and changing and growing and being willing to know when I'm wrong, and all for the good order of a legacy of what can be.
And the last question, ask every guest this question. Mm-hmm. If you're a superhero and you could have a superpower, what superpower would it be?
Well, I already have my superpower.
Okay, what is it?
and it's a love of community.
Oh, that's awesome.
And I use it every day, and I feel like I get the love right back. And I've never wavered from that. I don't do it perfectly, but people know my intentions. And I love the community, and I love the people in the community, and that's my superpower.
It's an awesome answer. And I think that fits you totally. So thank you for your time. Thank you for joining us. It was fabulous. You gave a lot of wisdom. So thank you for your time. And we'll see you next time on Real Talk. Make sure you subscribe to our podcast and check us out on YouTube. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Henry.
This is 365 Media.